am here to talk to you a little bit about the Sinfonia level audition flute excerpt for the Houston Youth Symphony this year. It is an exciting and energetic moment in the flute part from Liszt's orchestration of the Second Hungarian Rhapsody. Now there are a few things that you can do as you're preparing for your audition that will help your performance of this piece in your recording go really, really well. Now, obviously, when you get started, one of the most important things that I always encourage people to do is to make sure that they have a great plan for their breathing. As a woodwind player, our breath is the most important part of our sound. So if we can, as we start to get to know the music, create a good plan for where we're going to take our breaths, this is not only going to help as you make your choices for your musical decisions, but it will also help you know how you're going to plan out all of your phrases, where you're going to be able to take a moment to reset perhaps your embouchure or your articulation when it comes to the tonguing, and that is really going to help give you a great start to the piece. Always make sure that when you begin, you've taken a great breath, you fill your lungs all the way up, and then when you get set to play, you're ready to go. Right off the bat, I know that I'm going to take my breaths after the first D natural in the second measure, as well as in measure 6. I will take another breath after the D. The second thing that I really want you to pay attention to as you're preparing this excerpt is your articulation. There are a lot of different instructions in this short section of music. We see accents, we see sforzandos, we have staccato dots above many of the 8th notes and 16th notes. We also have passages that have short slurred pairs, as well as slurred groups of 3 with a staccato dot on the final 8th note. These give you a lot of variety of options when you're making your musical decisions, and it actually helps to pay attention to each of these things when you're creating your excerpt and making your musical choices, that these things can bring clarity and definition to your performance of the excerpt and also show the judges that you know exactly what you're doing. For example, right off the bat in measure 1, we have accents over the first 2 quarter notes. So you want to make sure that those 2 notes are given a lot of extra emphasis. 2 bars later, we see a short descending line with staccato dots over the 8th notes. So you want to make sure that you have a difference between these instructions on the page. Follow down to the next line. We have staccato dots on the 16th notes. These are difficult on the flute. This is an E natural, which is one of the notes that we most frequently crack. Everyone is familiar with this sound. So you want to make sure that when you get there, your embouchure is tight, your tongue is pointed towards the front of your mouth so that those E naturals can speak very clearly. And on we go. As we go down to the 3rd line of music, we have the slurred groups that I mentioned at the beginning, the 16th notes with the 8th. All of these need to be very legato, and the air needs to sustain through all 3 notes with a final lift at the end of the 8th note to give space before the beginning of the next beat. And the same when we hear the passage in the next key 2 lines later. Giving space when you see a staccato dot gives clarity to the phrase and again shows the listener that you know exactly what's going on the page here. Lastly, we have long sections of slurs over the ascending scales. These are really great demonstration of air energy, finger technique, and great control over the instrument in several dynamic and registers of the flute. So the first scale is in the key of B flat, which is going to be very familiar to the majority of you. So as you're preparing this excerpt, keep in mind that that scale in measure 379, as well as in measure 383, is a B flat major scale. So when you get there, there's no need to freak out. And on the following line, we have 2 times a G major scale going up to D. So when you're preparing this excerpt, you might want to take a little extra time to spruce up those B flat major scales and those G major scales. And finally, when we are preparing this, we want to keep in mind the energy that is required to sustain this excerpt all the way through to the end. When you're taking your great breaths, you're using your great articulation to give clarity to the phrase, and you are practicing for smoothness and evenness in all of your scales. This, in combination with your own energy, is going to make sure that this excerpt and your performance of it is your very best. Always make sure that you're practicing with your metronome. I like to move the metronome beat to different parts of the measure. For example, instead of simply putting the metronome on the big quarter note beats, I might move it to the eighth notes. Another great way to use your metronome is to put it on half notes for this specific excerpt, so we would have a beat sounding only on the big beats. For example, 1, 2, 1, 2. So you only hear those bigger bars. Can help you make sure that your internal rhythm and the internal pulse as you approach this excerpt is always very secure. Keep these things in mind, and I guarantee you'll have a great audition. Good luck.